about 6 weeks ago, or 5 weeks ago actually, this is week 6. 5 weeks ago, here from the Pattern Store, can you believe it? Well, we started a new series, Our Story, that we've been looking at for these last 6 weeks. It's the final week of the series. And we started back here 6 weeks ago, the pre-lockdown 2, in the book of Genesis. You remember looking at the fact that we are God-shaped to be God-shapers. And then we've gone on a journey these last few weeks from creation through to the fall, through to God's people, Israel, through to Jesus redeeming us and forgiving us for his death on the cross, to the church last week with some great squad preachers. And this week we're into the sort of the final chapter of the story, the final chapter of the Bible, Revelation. We started at creation, we're finishing with the new creation, with heaven. And it's been a lot of fun actually, sort of going through our story together these last 6 weeks. And these are some of the pegs that the whole kind of story of us, the whole story of the Bible, hang on. These are some of the key pegs that we've been talking about. They're not the whole story. There's actually so much more richness to be found. And one of the things that I hope actually these last 6 weeks have done for some of us is just like re-energize us to get back into the Word of God, to get back into the Bible. There's one brilliant lady in our church, Kirsten, she was so enthused a few months ago by the Bible. She managed to read the entire Bible in 90 days. 90 days! So there you go. If you're wondering about a New Year's resolution, what about? I mean, 90 days is quick, but maybe you want to do it in a year. Maybe that's something you want to think about. There's actually a great little app called Bible in 1 Year that you might want to give a go. It's got a bit from the Old Testament, New Testament, a bit of a psalm, and then actually Nikki, who leads HTB, he gives a little bit of a commentary. Maybe that's something you want to do. But we've enjoyed, haven't we, going through the story, and now we're looking at where does it all end up? Where does it finish? How does the story end? And so we're going to be looking together in the book of Revelation today. And I just want to read a few little passages that we're going to dive into together. So I'm kicking off Revelation 21. And I'm going to be reading, lovely, from that stuff, verses 3 and 4. It says, I heard a loud voice speaking from the throne. Now God's home is with people. He will live with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death or grief or crying or pain. The old things have disappeared. It carries on in verse 7. It says, those who win the victory will receive this from me. I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowards, traitors, perverts, murderers, and immoral, those who practice magic, those who worship idols and liars, and the place for them is in the lake of burning with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. We don't often talk about that kind of thing at Pattern Church, but actually, when you look at what you've been saved from, it's often so much more exciting to see what we're being saved to. And actually, this is a reminder that the new creation, that heaven, we get to be a part of it if we keep following Jesus. That's all we have to do. This is what we're invited to. And what we're invited to is a place where there is no more tears, no more death, no more grief or crying or pain. This is where it ends up. We're in a season right now where there's a lot of grief, a lot of crying, and a lot of pain. But in the new creation, in heaven, as we call it, there's going to be no more of that. Okay, carry on. I'm just going to race through a few different points from this Revelation 21 and 22, and then we'll unpack it a little bit together. So we carry on in verse 10 and 11. It says, the Spirit took control of me, and the angel carried me to the top of a very high mountain. He showed me Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down out of heaven from God, and shining with the glory of God. The city shone like a precious stone, like jasper, clear as crystal. And then it goes on, I'm not going to read them all, but it goes on to list all the different beautiful stones. So this book of Revelation is a prophecy that a guy called John, one of the disciples, sees. And when he sees heaven, he just sort of names all the most beautiful stones he can imagine in his attempt to try and describe just how beautiful it is. He uses everything he can think of. And that's what we see here. We see this place of beauty. And actually, it's an interesting thing that the Bible places quite a high sort of emphasis on things that are beautiful. I know for some of you guys here, you're creatives. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful cakes, or you draw beautiful pictures, or you write beautifully, or you make music, or you create films. And actually, there's something of heaven about creating beautiful things. And heaven is a place of unimaginable beauty. It's also a place that we're told it's a city. That we're going to be in a city. Sometimes when we think of heaven, we think about someone sitting on a cloud playing a harp. But that's not actually the picture that the Bible gives us. Heaven is full of people. So, but it's also obviously going to be a place where there's complete harmony. So there's loads of people, but there's no pain, no grief, no sadness. So it's a place where there is complete harmony, complete togetherness, where there's no broken relationships. That's what heaven's going to be like. We'll carry on. Just two more of these. In Revelation 21, verse 22, it goes on to say, I did not see a temple in the city, because its temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. The city has no need for the sun or the moon to shine on it, because the glory of God shines in it. And the Lamb is the lamp. The peoples of the world will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their wealth to it. The gates of the city will stand open all day. They'll never be closed, because there will be no night there. The greatness and the wealth of the nations will be brought to the city, but nothing that's impure will enter the city, nor anyone who does shameful things or tells lies. Only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of the living will enter the city. So there is no separation from God. I don't know, maybe some of you will have had moments in your life where you feel like you've encountered God in a way that just overwhelms you a bit. You might not have done, but some people you experience that. Well, imagine that there's so much of God's presence that there's no need for the sun. We don't need the sun anymore, because God's glory is just so present that's what gives us light. This is a picture. There's no need for sun or the moon because of God's glory. That's going to be what it's like in the new creation in heaven. And also there is nothing to be afraid of. And you remember what we talked about Nehemiah a couple of months ago. And we talked about how they need to rebuild the city gate because it didn't feel like a real city when it didn't have a proper gate, because they were open to attack. They were vulnerable. But the gates are always open in heaven because there's nothing to be afraid of anymore. All the things that make us scared, all the things that bring fear into our lives, all the bad things that can happen, they're not there anymore. All the sources of fear are gone. There's no need for the gate. There's no need for the temple. And our names are written there if we're following Jesus. Final one, I promise. Last couple of verses in Revelation 22, verses 2 and 3. It says, 3 and 4. You're worried there. It says, nothing that is under the curse will be found in the city. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will worship him. They'll see his face, and his name will be written on his foreheads. There shall be no more night, and they will not need lamps or sunlight, because the Lord God will be their light, and they will rule as kings forever and ever. So again, it's almost too wonderful to imagine this consistent intimacy with God, total intimacy. But we're also told there's a sense here that it's active, that we're going to reign with God forever. There's something active about what we're doing in heaven. So let's just have a quick recap what we just said together. So heaven is a new creation. It's for those who know Jesus. We get to be a part of it. It's a place of joy, no more sadness. A place of harmony. There's no more disunity, no more injustice. It's a place of beauty. It's a place where there's nothing to fear. It's a place where God is unfiltered. His presence is so glorious, we don't need anything else. Yeah, we can clap that. We can. This is how the story ends. This is how our story ends. This is the picture. And it is glorious. And there's just two things, just for a few minutes, I want us to just think about this. Is that it's a beautiful hope and it's a big calling. It's a beautiful hope, and it's a big calling. Beautiful hope. Just turn to the person next to you and, like, with your eyes, say, beautiful hope. It's a beautiful hope. If you're at home, you can speak to someone. It's a beautiful hope, and it's a big calling. It's a beautiful hope because for us as Christians, we live knowing this is the final point. We live knowing this is not it. That our destination is this place. We don't need to strive for stuff and for status. We can live for Jesus knowing that this is our inheritance, that this is where we're going. And for lots of people, particularly this year, but even beyond that, in this life there is lots of sadness. And for lots of people that has been exaggerated during lockdown. I'm just very aware of lots of sadness that people are experiencing at the moment. But that's been the case for actually forever since the fall. But I want to encourage you, it's not going to always be that way. Lord had enough of my talking. You want to listen to something else? It's not going to always be that way. We're not always going to be in a place where there's sadness. We're not always going to be in a place where there's hope. There's not always going to be in a place where there's health challenges. We're not always going to be in a place where there's disunity and broken relationships and pain. We're not always going to be in a place where there's sickness. We're not always going to be in a place where there's global pandemics. We're not always going to be in a place where there are things to be scared of. This is a glorious, wonderful hope. And this is something for us to celebrate as Christians. And something for us to celebrate when we're telling people about the hope that Jesus brings. It's a hope for now, but it's also a glorious, big hope that you and I get this eternity. This is what we're invited to. And it's like, I don't know, I quite enjoy going to see live music. Anyone enjoy live music? Ever so often when you go and see live music, normally actually the support acts are great. But sometimes you go there and the support act is absolutely diabolical. I remember once actually when I lived in Cape Town for 5 years, we saw Basement Jaxx. Remember those guys? Where's your head at? And he actually fell off the stage during that song and really hurt his head, but that's a different part of the story. But the support act for Basement Jaxx was this like freestyle rapper. He was so abysmal. It was like, and like there was one, I don't need to take you to the story, you got it already. But we had to sit through a few minutes of this abysmal act, and then we got the brilliant thing. And it's a bit like that with us. That actually, in life there is pain and sadness and things that hurt, but that is just a support act. We've got the glories of heaven to look forward to. And actually, when as Christians we have to sacrifice, and we're invited to lay our lives down, and we do things that cost us, we do that holding on to the fact that we've got a glorious future. And when we're enduring things that are painful and they hurt, we do that knowing there's a glorious future. It's like having a 1,000,000-course meal, and the first course is a few things that could be improved. That's what it's like when we look at the eternal picture. And it's so important for us as Christians because everything around us tells us that this life is it. But it's not. This life is a grain of sand compared to the glorious eternity that we're welcomed into. So it is a beautiful hope. It's a beautiful hope. A beautiful hope. It's also a big calling. It's a big calling that you and I have. With this being our story, we have a big calling. The most famous prayer in the Bible that Jesus taught us, so you might have said it in Scouts, we say it sometimes at church, the Lord's Prayer. You can sort of say it along with me. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. The next bit becomes important. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What's Jesus saying to us when he tells us to pray that? When he's asked by his disciples, how should we pray? He says, pray like this. What he's saying is pray that earth is like heaven, is like this. It's like this place with no more fear, nothing to be scared of, no more distance from God, no more disunity, no more injustice, no more sadness. We're supposed to pray that earth is like this. We're supposed to work with God in partnership to make earth more like heaven. That's part of our big calling as Christians, to be people who act and pray that heaven is seen here today. That's what Jesus says. And he wouldn't tell us to pray it if it wasn't going to happen. He says, pray it because I want to partner with you to make Swindon, to make the places you live more like heaven. And this is our calling in the here and now. The big calling that goes with a beautiful hope is for us to be people who act and pray to see earth more like heaven, to see earth more like this new creation. And there's things we do together as a church. I mean, the big heart of why we run Alpha is because we want people to be part of this with us. But new things that are kicking off at the moment, the boxes of hope. Why are we doing that? Because, well, in heaven, no one's isolated and hungry. And so we want to try and help with that. Things like Safe Families that we've been involved in, or the youth mentoring that we're kicking off in partnership with Gateway Church, Starting Point. Our heart for that is that we don't want people to feel stuck. We don't want people to feel like they're on their own. Don't want people to feel like they're facing things and there isn't a hope. Because there is a hope in heaven. And so we're looking to try and make earth a little bit more like heaven. Cross-Light Debt Advice that's kicking off. And there'll be people in this room, people watching online who at points in your life, debt's been a huge struggle, and you'll know how scary that is. It's really, really scary. If you haven't experienced that, it's really scary. But in heaven, well, the sources of fear are gone. And so we want to make that a reality for people on earth. We want to bring hope. So there's some of the things that we're doing together to make earth more like heaven. But I want you guys to be tuning over as well. Where are the places in your life? Where are the places in your places of work, in your streets around you, where people's lives don't look like this? And where's God calling you to act and pray that heaven is seen? Where there's loneliness, where there can be togetherness, where there's disunity, where there can be harmony, where there's isolation, where there can be community, where there's pain and sickness, where we can go and pray for healing, where there's injustice, where we can act and pray for things to change. What's God calling you to? It's our beautiful hope, but it's also our big calling. It's our big calling as Christians. And the story is heading this way, and this is our job. I mean, you guys have heard me 100 times talk about vision, but these are some of the things we're dreaming of. Like, why are we dreaming of 1,000 baptisms? Because we want people to be part of this. The army of young people that we want running with a glorious hope and with a big calling. We want to see want to make a difference to some of the social issues. Why? Because there's not going to be these same social challenges, people being stuck in the same ways in heaven. We're planting churches that plant churches. Why? Because we want to see this glorious hope shared. We want to make a difference all across our town. So the vision, inviting people into family to serve Swindon, clinging on to this beautiful hope and running with all we can, praying and doing our part with this big calling. Because this is our story. And this is a story that every one of us is invited to inhabit, to recognize we're made in God's image, to recognize that I do things that where I choose to disobey God, where I choose to go my own way, where there's other things that I try and look to for my security rather than God, but that I am completely forgiven in Jesus, that we're the church representing God on earth, that we've got a glorious hope, and we've got a big calling. And this is our story that we're called to live out in the here and now, here in Swindon. And I suppose my invitation to each of us is, how's God calling you to dive into this story? How's God calling you to hold it for yourself, to inhabit it, to work with God in living this out in the here and the now, in the nitty-gritty of life? We have got a beautiful hope, and we've got a big calling. Imagine if each one of us grabbed hold of it Imagine if each one of us realized actually this life wasn't it. We've got a glorious future. The sense of comfort that brings, the sense of excitement, the sense of actually, okay, I've got however many years here to partner with God to make this a reality on earth. Imagine the new sense of peace that we carry, the new sense of eternal identity, the new security we walk with, but also the new sense of calling in the everyday. I'm here in this building society to make it more like heaven. I'm here in this school to make it more like heaven. I'm here in this hospital to make it more like heaven. I'm here in this business to make it more like heaven. I'm here in this street, in this home, in this family to make it more like heaven. This is what we're called to do. Imagine what 2021 could look like if every one of us here, everyone watching at home, grabbed hold of it. Imagine what we and the Lord could do.